insulin because in type 1, the beta cells that produce insulin in the pancreas can't actually get insulin out. So they have no way of actually getting insulin into the bloodstream. Now, the issue with type 2 diabetes is, and in type 1, you'll see with children more or less, you see that's usually with children. Now, with type 2, it's more adult onset, and it's called non-insulin dependent because essentially what's happening there is that the beta cells could get insulin out of the pancreas. But now the challenge is that once the sugar is in the blood vessels, it can't adequately get the sugar to the cells in our body, right? So that's the big difference between the two. So um, now you usually what's interesting is that it used to be that type 1 was seen in kids, but now we're seeing it type 2 as well, which has been adult for quite some time, and now it's being seen in children. And we're talking 14 years old, kids are getting type 2 diabetes. So it's so important to engage our kids, keep them active the best we can, exercise, extracurricular activities. It's so important. Um, now, I, also as well, like let's talk about treatment, and then I want to bring out a couple points from the slide. So first and foremost, I think just like how Ellie, also Ellie put together these slides and she did a great job. So thank you, Ellie. I can't take any credit for that. But healthy eating, meal prepping is probably the first most important thing for both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. That's really where it starts. Now, obviously, increasing physical exercise is very important. That helps get that sugar out of the blood vessels. Um, and it says here blood sugar checks for type 1 and type 2 diabetes. Now, it's important to remember that with type 1, they always need some insulin, right? So they have a continuous insulin pump where basically they're getting insulin throughout the day. So their blood sugar checks are happening during the day, throughout the day. Now, for type 2 diabetes, it doesn't really have to happen like that. So for type 2 diabetes patients, like they could be seeing a primary care specialist, endocrinologist every 3 months and getting their average sugar checked. Ellie will talk more about that. That's called hemoglobin A1C. That gives us a general average. It's just basic blood work that tells us where they're running at. So my patients, I don't, if they're well controlled, I don't have them, type 2 patients, don't have them really getting sugar checks every day. It's not always needed. Now, so like we said, type 1 diabetes, uh, they need insulin. Now, when it comes to type 2 diabetes, you don't they don't really need insulin, right? They a lot can be well managed with exercise, and sometimes you need medication aids to help support that process. Um, I mean, hemoglobin A1C that I talked about, that blood work, so that uh, you basically um, if it's over 10, like we want you, somebody that has diabetes, the number is under 7, we want you to at least be at. But if they're over 10, then that's generally where I start insulin because they're really going to need more support than just an oral medication at that point. Um, so, and, and I want to bring out some ideas here. Well, first topic is like how to get a check form. Like it's very basic. It's like any set of blood work. You go in for a physical, you ask a primary care provider, but also like many GYN, OBGYN will order it, kidney specialists, endocrinologists. I mean, I even have patients that come to me and they say, I'm going to do their physical. And like, oh, I already got my blood work from some online place. Like, it's so basic to get blood work done. I think for me, like, if I could just give my message today is get blood work done once a year. Like, just get a physical once a year. It's so easy, and this is can be so well managed. I get very concerned when I see somebody after 5 years that hasn't seen practitioner and they have symptoms, and I know their sugar is going to be completely out of control, and it is. It happens all the time. So that's like my tip is please get your blood work done. Um, so So I was going to say one more thing about this. Like, why is it so important to get blood sugar out of the blood vessels? Okay. Because essentially what's going to happen down the road, and Ellie's going to talk about this later, a great slide at the end, it leads to damage of the blood vessels. And how does it do that? It basically increases plaque formation. It tells the liver to basically produce more bad plaque. Okay. And that's going to narrow the opening of the blood vessels. And from there, first steps that happen is chronic nerve pain, but more importantly, leading to stroke or heart attacks because you basically either that plaque could break off and cause blockage somewhere else, or just closing off the lumen of the blood flow. So it's so critical, um, and it could be so well managed. So that's why it's so important. That's why we care about it mostly. Um, I was just going to say a couple other things here. So when I see patients, usually their type 1 diabetes has already been diagnosed because they as a child, like they don't have any way to get insulin out of the pancreas, right? And that insulin can't help uh, get that sugar to out of the blood vessels to the cells of the body. So I see a lot more management for type 2 diabetes. Just want to make that distinction. Some primary care practitioners feel comfortable managing type 1 diabetes. I generally have those patients see endocrinologists because we have to really set a lot of the the glucose or I guess regimen throughout the day because they have to constantly be getting it um, that insulin. So it's a little bit less out of my practice. So it's more fine-tuned and it's a little bit more specific. So I just wanted to make that distinction as well. Let's see here. Any other things I had on the slide? Um, oh yeah, another thing is okay, we talked about it. All right, we go to the next slide. Yep. Okay, excellent. So pre-diabetes. I feel like pre-diabetes is almost like it's like the warning sign. It's like we have to start working out, right? So it again, remember that hemoglobin A1C, Ellie's gonna talk about it, but basically between like 5.7 and 6.4, that's basically like that framework of if it's a little bit elevated, doesn't mean you have diabetes because diabetes is 6.5 or more, that number, that numerical value on the blood work. So but when it's basically saying that when the sugar levels are higher than normal, so that means that those folks are likely to develop type 2 diabetes, and and they might have also like underlying diabetes related conditions as well that are bringing up that sugar. Uh, but again, lifestyle modifications is the most critical thing. It's interesting with pre-diabetes. I have patients that they'll say they want to be on a medication for prediabetes. And sometimes practitioners will do that. I really encourage less of the chemical, like less of that medication because the tendency is that they'll use the medication to not get diabetes, but then they're not doing the excellent efforts of diet and exercise and working with nutritionists. So, but obviously it's a form of treatment. Like if they're already doing those excellent efforts to also give them medication to help make sure they don't get the diabetes, it is fine as well. Um, just here real quick. Yeah, and like what's good about prediabetes is that if it's elevated, we always could check it 6 months later. Like it's something we could track, and it's a great way to just figure that one out to see where somebody's risk is for developing diabetes. Um, so what's generally happening uh, uh, from the bloodstream to the cells? So basically, insulin, like we said, is needed to move from that bloodstream right into the cells. Now, that insulin is really the only way that you could it transfers that blood sugar into the cells. So without that insulin, so the body's got to figure out a way to nourish the cells, right? To give it energy. So the sugars are accumulating in the bloodstream, right? And the cells got to find some energy. So it has to go through a different process. Okay. So that process basically is where the body needs to break down fat to use for energy. So it's got to go through a different avenue. Now, The common symptoms you'll see with this is excessive thirst, frequent urination, and tiredness. They could be really hungry as well. Another one, but that's where I get mostly concerned. So like we kind of like made a progression. Like the first I just talked about generally, let's get the blood work done, right? Pre-diabetes is like we have to start making dietary changes. And lastly, it's like when I see these symptoms, their A1Cs are like they're really out of control, like 10 to 14. So yeah, so that's this is my portion that Ellie's gonna pick up now. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Ellie. Thank you, Adam. So I will just advance. So this last slide, I didn't get to animate for Adam. So let's move in to A1C. So first, I want to welcome everyone and say thank you. Just by showing up here this morning, everyone on this call has already taken an active step in being interested in their health. And if you already have a diagnosis of diabetes, then you are managing your diabetes by showing up and choosing to learn more on your busy Sunday. So thank you for that. Getting into, as Adam has mentioned about the A1C, many of you have heard of it, some of you may have not, but it is the gold standard in measuring and diagnosing type 1 diabetes. We don't, as a provider, we don't like to use it as a report card. We don't want anyone to feel that the A1C is, you know, a passing or a failing grade, but it just helps the provider better formulate a plan, titrate medications, insulin, and so forth. It is a 3-month blood glucose average. So we're looking at how your body has been processing glucose over the previous 3 months. It's measuring the glucose that's actually attached to a red blood cell. And based on that number, we can translate it into an average blood glucose percentage. Our goal, and this is all according to the ADA, the American Diabetes Association, which is a phenomenal resource for those of you who want to check out the website. They've got great information, snack information. So a lot of my information is coming from the ADA, which recommends our A1C be as close to 7% as possible. The A1C goals are going to be different for someone who has prediabetes or already has a diagnosis of type 1 or type 2, pediatric, adult. So we do have different percentages that we are targeting to. But again, an A1C of 7 translates into a rough blood glucose number of 154. Now, a new metric that has been more popular over the years is something called TIR, or time in range. The reason why it's a relatively new metric is because we now have the advent of continuous glucose monitoring. Whereas in prior years, patients, as Adam mentioned, had to finger stick and use a blood sample to get a number. Now we have a device, and I'm going to show you a picture in a few slides, and it will give you a continuous reading. It actually is measuring your glucose every 5 minutes. So we can really get a better understanding of where our blood sugar is. And now we understand the goal. So the goal, if you guys remember one number for this entire, there's a lot of numbers in diabetes, but if you can remember one, well, 2, because it's really a range, but 70 to 180. So this is where we want you to be, because an A1C of 154, 7%, right? You could be running 300 and you could have 50s, but that's not healthy. So we've made that goal 70 to 180. We don't want to see you on either extreme. So getting to those numbers, because as I mentioned, lots of numbers, and I don't want this slide to be overly intimidating, so I'm going to break it down for everyone. Without diabetes, and I don't like using the word normal, but the ADA used it, so we'll just go with this. But non-diagnosis of diabetes, we do want your A1C under 5.7. With the diagnosis of prediabetes, the goal is actually to keep it there. It is perfectly acceptable for someone to hang out in the 5.7 to 6.4 range. Now, the reason we start paying close attention, and sometimes people start to get nervous when their doctor has told them they now have prediabetes, is because the A1C can creep up really quickly. So we do try and target you lower down. But again, I want to emphasize that having a diagnosis, if you can stay in a prediabetes range, long-term outcomes are very, very positive. We diagnose diabetes with an A1C of over 6.5. And at that point, it's either type 1 or type 2, and you need some further blood work and analysis to determine which type of diabetes you have. And that's for a longer conversation. Now, as far as our numbers, our fasting blood glucose numbers, so this would be your first morning wake up number. Either you're sticking your finger with a meter or you're looking at your CGM. We want you to be under 100. If you have a 100 to 125, and again, this has to be on at least 2 occasions, we would confirm a diagnosis of prediabetes. Anything at 125 or above, again, on more than 2 or 3 occasions, is a diagnosis of diabetes. And oral glucose, meaning we're gonna, for many women who have done the diabetes test of pregnancy to test for gestational diabetes, you know about doing the sugar challenge. So you drink a really sugary drink and we see how your body then responds to the sugar, how well your body processed it. So we want to see you under 140 after a meal. And then again, if you are hitting those higher numbers, we are starting to get concerned and think about prediabetes and diabetes. So who should get tested? Adam said everyone should be having their blood work done if you're 45 or older. But a lot of red flags may warrant an earlier test. Overweight, family history, and this could be a family history of type 1 or type 2. Both of them are genetic. It's a big discussion whether or not type 1 is an autoimmune. So autoimmunes tend to run in the family. So sometimes a diagnosis of thyroid, celiac, lupus, all of that while it's not diabetes, it falls under a type 1 autoimmune category. Type 2 is of course hereditary, but contributing factors are of course a sedentary lifestyle, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. For women who give birth to a baby over 9 pounds puts them a higher risk for developing type 2. And then of course certain ethnic or minority groups are also just at an inherent risk. This is something that some people have seen on themselves or maybe others. And I always, I don't, it's not something funny, but oftentimes a parent or a patient will present in clinic and they'll say they have no idea that this is actually the early onset type 2, but they'll say their child or they are noticing like a darkening around the skin folds of the body. So it could be on the neck, under the arms, behind the knees, anywhere where you see skin folds, and the parent's trying to like scrub it out. But this is, the fancy word is acanthosis nigricans. It's a hyperpigmentation, so it's a darkening, and this shows early signs of insulin resistance, or sometimes not even early signs, and they already have a diagnosis of diabetes. So this is a physical sign that we see, but then there's also some of the other red flags Adam mentioned. Extreme thirst. So you'll see, and for parents who are concerned of type 1, it is extreme. It's a hot day and your child asks for an extra cup of water. They need to stop every hour and drink tons and tons of water. Urination. So you'll have an older child or even an adult who wets the bed at night, which is of course unusual. Blurry vision is really common with high blood sugars, and of course being tired. So weight loss, all of these are symptoms that of course are suggestive of diabetes. Okay, as promised, our slide on continuous glucose monitoring. I read recently, and I'm going to tend to agree with the statement, that CGM is next to the discovery of insulin, is the second best diabetes movement that we've had, meaning like insulin obviously has saved lives, and CGM is right up there with the discovery of insulin. It has absolutely changed lives for many people. So as patients were checking their blood sugar multiple times a day, they didn't know which direction their blood sugar was going in, which is a big deal. This now is an incredible amount of data we can have at our fingertips. As a side note, it is something that your doctor can prescribe if you have a diagnosis of type 2 via prescription. Some really good insurances will allow it with prediabetes, but I don't see that very often. However, there are monitors within the past few months that are now over the counter. So Libre and Dexcom are 2 brands. I don't work for any companies, no disclosures there. Libre and Dexcom are 2 brands that you can actually buy over the counter. They are not cheap, but they are an incredibly great tool to help you get your diabetes under control and recognize patterns. The sensor is inserted under your skin. It is not painful at all. You do it on your own. It feels like a quick snap, like a rubber band snap. And the data is then transferred to either a separate receiver, your phone, or a watch. So you're getting this data in a very convenient way. You can set alarms. So if you want to be notified at or below a certain number, it has a lot of customized features that are really an incredible amount of data, which then teaches you. So for type 1s, we're using this more aggressively to diagnose insulin. But for people with prediabetes or diabetes, this is just a fascinating way to see what different foods do to your blood sugar, what exercise, what stress levels. It really gives you this very full picture of how your body responds to different environments and of course different foods. So I don't like to talk about complications because I always prefer that we take a more controlled and, this is what we're doing to avoid it. But I, can't give a diabetes lecture without talking about some of the bad stuff of diabetes, and as you see, it's multi-systemic. So diabetes is, you hear about it in the news, everyone reads about it. It really does affect every organ. It's a disease that has to do with our blood sugar. And we know our blood is moving all around our body. So we wouldn't expect it not to affect every organ. So it is important. It is so important to take care of your diabetes, to catch it early. Oftentimes people ask me how I got into diabetes. I think what attracted me to it is because it is a disease of self-management. Very few conditions or diseases do patients have the ability to control, right, with their own actions and their own environment. But diabetes let me distinguish this, type 2 diabetes. Type 1 is, completely irreversible. But type 2 diabetes is something that truly is in your control. The decisions you make, the actions you take can positively affect these. So this slide is not meant to scare anyone. These are reversible with good management. How to prevent. Brendel's going to get much more into the nutrition aspect, but I'll just touch on that real quick. Obviously, good eating habits, routine eating, okay? Our body loves routines, especially once you do have a diagnosis of diabetes. Believe it or not, your blood sugar likes to predict when you're eating. It really wants you to eat on a routine with the same quantities at each meal. Obviously, everyone on this call knows about holidays and Shabbos, so we are very far. We break our routine pretty often, but I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that routine is good. Exercise. So all forms of exercise is great. I will tell you, if you're moving, it's the best exercise. But a post-meal walk, interesting, and this is study-based, they have shown that doing a 15 to 30-minute post-meal walk has done more to your blood glucose than an intense aerobic activity first thing in the morning before you've eaten. So think about that next time we tend to want to do that after our biggest meal, which for most Americans is dinner. So and now we've got some nice weather in our forecast. So think about this as you eat a big meal. Take a walk around your block. If you're wearing a continuous glucose monitor, you will actually see the trend starting to move down, and that can be very motivating for you. So you will, if I can encourage anyone, it's that post-dinner walk. I live in Kent Mill, so if I see you walking on the streets, I'll give you a high five. Sleep. Sleep is underrated. It is important to help keep our blood sugars in check. So getting enough sleep is important for mental health and everything, but fun fact, it's also important for diabetes. And alcohol, right? We all know alcohol in moderation, absolutely fine, but it does have carbs, and even the alcohol effect, it complicates our liver. So obviously limiting that is ideal. Final slide, and then I'm going to move it along, is just some really great resources. Brendel's going to give you even more, but as I've already mentioned before, the ADA, very great organization to just bookmark. Take a look at they've got walks in the community if you're interested in getting really involved. And these are some other great websites. The Breakthrough Diabetes, many of you may have heard of JDRF, which type 1 is no longer, it used to be called Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, but because we're seeing type 1 diagnosed, I just had a 67-year-old woman diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. So we are definitely not labeling it as a juvenile condition anymore. So they have rebranded, and it is now under the name Breakthrough T1D. And with that, it's been a pleasure to see everyone. Thank you for joining, and I'm going to pass it along to our wonderful dietitian, Brendel Planka.
All right, give me a moment while I get my screen shared. Ooh, I gotta do it like this. Thank you so much for inviting me, by the way. I feel very fortunate that I can share good information with you. Hold on. Oh, here we go. Alrighty. So, I can even do like this. There we go. All right. Thank you so much, Speaker Holm of Greater Washington. And I want you all to hopefully leave this whole presentation feeling very empowered, that you have really good information, and that there's really things that you could do. We are going to get from, you're probably not quite at that person on the left side because you already learned a lot from Adam and Ellie, but you're going to leave feeling like you know a whole ton. You're not going to feel, oh no, what do I do? You're going to be like, woohoo, I'm going to go out for my walk and meet Ellie on the street. I don't know if you'll meet me on the street. I'm in Baltimore, but maybe I'll take a trip over and see all your faces in person. Okay, so here are some of the things that we're going to do today. We're going to discuss nutrition for diabetes prevention. So if for somebody who's not even in pre-diabetes or in the pre-diabetes phase, these things of course translate also if someone's in diabetes already. We are going to learn about carbs, digestion, fiber, blood sugar, how those are related, which Ellie gave a really good start with, and we're going to take that and continue with that. We'll talk about foods that are carbs, which a lot of you may be familiar with. We will discuss quality of carbs. We will talk about feeling full or satiety after eating, which is often a big concern for people. I'm going to feel like I'm hungry all the time. If you tell me I'm not allowed to eat this, I can't eat that, I'm just going to be hungry all the time. We're going to really talk about that a bit. I will talk about building a healthy meal, basics of that, what types of foods, how much, and we'll talk a bit more about physical activity and then some practical ideas. So be like that lady on my screen and pay attention. We are going to learn a lot today. All right, so how can nutrition prevent diabetes? I'm going to start with telling you that diabetes is my favorite disease. What do I mean by that? Ellie talked about this a little bit. So diabetes is very actionable. It's not a death sentence. It's not you're doomed if you have diabetes or pre-diabetes. It is exceedingly actionable. There's so many things you can do about it. I'll give you a few examples. You can regularly see your primary care provider for regular blood work and maintaining the rest of your health. You could, there's physical activity, there's nutrition, there's medications that could help. There's, we can get referrals to other specialists, diabetes educators, exercise physiologists, PT if mobility is hard for you and you're trying to exercise. There's a lot that you could do with diabetes. It's not doom and gloom. It's a lot of hope. Nutrition can help prevent diabetes by lowering blood sugars in the short run. And with physical activity, we can actually impact the underlying disease process that starts with pre-diabetes and moves into diabetes. So physical activity can improve insulin resistance, which is the underlying disease process. We'll talk about that a bit more. Nutrition can help you feel more satisfied, and sometimes that can help with preventing overeating if the foods that you're eating are foods that can help really promote feeling full. And of course, good nutrition can help you enjoy food more. Let's see. Okay, so I kind of stole a little graphic from Ellie over there. So when we eat carbohydrates, whether that's oatmeal or a donut or an apple, those foods contain carbs. Those carbs are broken down starting in a drop in your mouth, actually, more in your stomach and then more in the small intestine. Those carbohydrates are broken up into sugar. And that sugar moves from your intestines through the intestinal wall into your blood sugar. And that's what we're talking about when we say blood sugar. You can have a bit of your blood sugar created from the liver, creates some sugar, but for the most part, we're talking about the sugars that comes from your food. And like you can see in this beautiful before graphic or both, that red column is your blood vessel, and there's sugar floating through there, and insulin, or your body notices, hey, blood sugars are rising up. And in response, your body creates insulin in the pancreas, and insulin comes into your blood, takes those sugar molecules, brings it into your cell, out of your blood vessels and into your cells, so the cells can use it for energy, and that way your blood vessels have your sugars in the nice range that we like. What happens beginning with pre-diabetes and into diabetes is what we call insulin resistance. You see that lock and key? So with insulin resistance, the cell, which holds the lock to allow the insulin, which is the key, come in, the cell's like, stay out. The cell is resistant to your insulin. The insulin's there, the sugar's there, the cell's saying, stay out. So in response, your body tries to compensate by creating more insulin, almost as if you don't listen to me when I'm talking, I'm going to shout. You're not listening to me with normal amounts of insulin. I'm going to throw a lot of insulin at you and convince the cells to let the sugar in. That does kind of work a bit in the beginning, especially in the pre-diabetes phase. So that's when blood sugars aren't quite so high yet. And then as insulin resistance gets worse, the extra insulin production doesn't quite help as much. And a second problem with extra insulin production that we see is insulin is also a growth hormone. What that means is that insulin makes it more likely for you to gain weight and harder to lose weight. So diabetes and weight concerns are this difficult circle that we could get out of. A higher weight could put someone at higher risk of prediabetes and diabetes, but once someone has this insulin resistance process, that can make it much harder to lose weight also. Now, we'll talk a bit about fiber and fat and protein and how that affects blood sugars. So fiber, which is a type of carb, actually slows digestion. So let's say you're having whole wheat bread versus white bread. If it's whole wheat bread, that's a high fiber food. The bread's going to be digested slower, and that slows the rise of blood sugar. If you're eating a piece of white bread, it's digested quicker, and all the sugar from those carbs ends up in your bloodstream much quicker, spike in blood sugars. So high fiber foods are really great for managing blood sugars. Ileal brake for slowing digestion. Okay, so this is for foods with fat, which is a really important nutrient for helping us feel full. So when foods with fat are being digested and they get to the end of the small intestine, that end of the small intestine is called the ileum. There's a mechanism called the ileal brake meaning to stop, slow down. That causes your intestine and your entire digestive tract to slow down its movements. So foods or digesting food, fat specifically in the ileum, makes your digestive tract slow down, causing digesting food to stay wherever it is in your digestive tract, contributing to more of a feeling of satiety, but it also slows digestion, slows down the breakdown of food that's higher up in your digestive tract or breaking down in your intestines. So fat actually slows the breakdown of sugar or carbs too. Now, in general, meals with protein and fat slow the rise in blood sugar. So let's say you have your bread, or you have your bread and tuna fish. The bread and tuna fish sandwich will have a slower rise, usually will lead to slower rise in blood sugar compared to plain bread. Let's see. Can we go forward? There we go. Okay, now we are going to do wonderful, fun, interactive stuff. Can everybody type into the chat box a few foods or one food that they know of that contains carbs? And let's see if I could look at them. Ellie says bananas. Audrey says cookies. Anybody else have some grand ideas? 2 minutes. Okay, we'll go over some, and meanwhile you can put in some more. Okay, so all fruit contain carbs. There is a bit of a misconception that there's some fruit that are like super worse for blood sugars and some fruit that are like carb free. That is quite a misconception. Gram for gram, fruit are quite similar. There's some minor differences, and that's not where I will, as a dietitian, put the focus on someone's diabetes care. I guess in general, we could say that maybe berries are somewhat lower in carbs, and fruit that are somewhat lower in fiber might cause a little bit of a quicker rise in blood sugar, but it's important to remember that as a whole, fruit are more similar than different. Some vegetables contain carbs, your potatoes, peas, corn, your hard squashes like your pumpkin, butternut squash, those contain some carbs. Most dairy, so milk and yogurt, have natural milk sugar called lactose. If you've heard of someone being lactose intolerant, that's an intolerance to the sugar in the milk. So they contain some carbs. Like a hard cheese like cheddar or mozzarella doesn't have carbs. Grains, all grains we know have carbs. So everything from your oats to your bread, to pasta, rice, legumes, so potato, lentils, beans, chickpeas, those have carbs. Nuts have some carbs, and sweets and baked goods. Now, I want you to understand that I haven't stated yet, and I don't think I will, that they're forbidden. Okay, a lot of these carbs are wonderful parts of a healthy diet for somebody with prediabetes or diabetes. A lot of this has to do with, yes, how much carb we are choosing to eat, but also are we optimizing the carbs that we are choosing? And I think we're going to get into that very shortly. Okay, we will get into it. Okay, are some carbs better for diabetes and prevention and health than others? Wait, hold on. I think some people gave me some more carb foods. Potatoes, Rose said cake, someone said beans. Woo, yes, those. Okay. Um, yes, it's a good rhetorical question. Some carbs are better for diabetes prevention and good health in general. So there is a difference between simple or refined carbs and complex carbs, and we hinted at it a little bit earlier. So a simple carb is a carb that digests easily, low in fiber, or has no fiber, something like white rice or our little donut guy over there, or maybe like white bread or white pasta. A complex carb would be something like beans, whole wheat bread, oatmeal, nuts. Those foods are high in fiber and overall digest much slower. Now, there are some foods that are straight up sugar. They're not even, I wouldn't even call them a simple carb. They're like simpler than that. And that would be things like, I don't know, a lollipop, soda, apple juice, orange juice. So there's some examples. Now, there are some foods that have natural sugars, and you might have heard also about added sugars. It's helpful to remember that both natural and added sugars can make your blood sugars high. Generally, if a food does not have added sugars and has some natural sugars, it generally tends to be a more nutritious food. Those foods are things like fruit and dairy. There are natural sugars in fruit. There's also a lot of fiber, so it's a food that gives you more nutrition bang for your buck. Fruit also has vitamins and minerals. Your milk, for example, has some naturally present sugars, your lactose, but it also has some fat that could be helpful and it has some protein that could be helpful. So the food gives you more nutrition bang for your buck. Something with some of both, you might see like a flavored yogurt. So it has some natural sugars because the milk food. It might say on it, for example, total sugars, 20 grams, added sugars, 12 grams. And if you did the math, maybe there's 8 grams of natural milk sugar and then 12 grams of added sugar. Yogurt is a food where we see that a lot. Fiber content, like we've been talking, is a big piece of what makes a carb option a wonderful option. And then the other nutrients in carb foods will let us know, is this food giving us nutrition bang for your buck, or is it just carbs? Carbs don't have to be avoided, just optimized. You know, sometimes we get very zealous in our health, which is sometimes great, and sometimes we get very, maybe a little too zealous. And especially for, you know, if people are more anxious about their health and they're like, oh, I have prediabetes, I can't eat any carbs. And then maybe they're starting to get really hungry because they're avoiding all carbs. You don't need zero carbs for prediabetes, and even with diabetes, zero carbs is not necessary. In general, a portion of carbs at a meal is appropriate, but when those carbs are high in fiber, you're optimizing those carbs. You're making them slow down blood sugar rises, but you're also optimizing for GI health and for heart health and for other feeling full and satisfied, things that are really important for your overall health, rather than just looking at, is it carbs? Might it raise my blood sugar at all? I need to avoid it versus, okay, I need some carbs. Let me make sure they're worthwhile for my overall health. So that way I can feel full and manage my health too. Okay, let's see where we are. All right, so let's talk now about feeling satisfied after eating. So it's really important to feel satisfied after you eat, goes without saying. When we don't, we end up with a lot of food noise where our brains are constantly telling us thoughts of food. Some people at baseline have a lot of food noise. And some people don't really think about food at all during the day between meals. But when you're hungry, one of the earliest signs of hunger is actually your brain will start thinking thoughts of food. And sometimes people don't realize that's an early sign of hunger. So maybe you start thinking, hey, well, I wonder what I'm having for lunch. Or did I remember to pack my lunch? Or, I can't wait till I eat my whatever it is for lunch. So when we optimize what we're eating for satiety, it can turn down the notch on food noise, turn down the dial on food noise throughout the whole day. There are three categories of food that really promote satiety, and they are protein, fat, fiber. We touched on them a little bit already. Now, the feeling satisfied is not just, is there food in my stomach, but there's hormonal mechanisms that cause us to feel satisfied, and then other hormonal mechanisms or hormonal signals that cause us to feel hungry. When we've eaten protein, it gets digested in the small intestine, and the breakdown byproducts of protein. So as your protein is being digested and the little bits that it's broken into trigger the release of certain satiety or fullness hormones. Those hormones start floating through your blood, and then they start to hit receptors in your brain. And as they fill those receptors in your brain starts or stops thinking I'm hungry, and you stop thinking about food and you feel more satisfied. Um, Fat also gives you a strong, slightly more delayed satiety mechanism. The bulk of fat's mechanism of keeping you full is when it gets to the ileum, that ileal break. We get some of it a bit earlier, but fat is a really great piece of feeling full. A lot of times people are fearful of eating more fat with a misconception that eating fat makes one fat. In general, when people are optimizing for healthier fats, they tend to feel more satisfied. And at worst, their weight stays the same. And sometimes weight can even go down when people are optimizing for the types of fat that they're eating. And fiber also contributes to satiety. So fiber can hold water, it can absorb water or it expands when water and fiber mix. And especially in the stomach and in the small intestines, that will take up space in the stomach and intestines, push on the walls of the stomach and intestines, and trigger the stretch receptors, which also triggers some hormones of satiety. Um, it's helpful to remember that hunger and satiety are very hormonally mediated. It's not like I like pink, so I'm going to wear a pink shirt. It's not like a decision or like not so much something that you could control the sense of hunger in the moment. What we more could do is start our day well and make our food choices intentionally during the day to optimize for satiety and lower the likelihood that we'll feel super high cravings or very hungry later. In the moment when one is feeling very hungry, it's very much a physiologic drive. It's not like the same drive as I want to wear a pink shirt today. It's a very physiologic drive at the moment. Now, besides for these physiologic parts of fullness and satiety, there is a really important pleasure aspect of satiety. Now, if you eat a very boring meal that ticks off the boxes technically for satiety. Maybe it's like chicken that has no spices on it, boiled beans that have no flavor to them, and I don't know, pureed broccoli. None of those foods are bad or in any way, but maybe they don't give you that pleasure sensation that food that with more spices or flavor or texture might give you. So you end the meal perhaps lacking on hitting those pleasure notes. We tend to feel more satisfied when we fill the two cups when we're eating, the fullness cup and the pleasure cup. It's important to note that. Now, pleasure from food, sometimes we just associate with, let's say, sweets or salty food. I'm sure all of you have moments where you've eaten foods that are really great for you, that are pleasurable, that really that grilled chicken that had such a great marinade on it, that really cool grain salad that had nice vegetables and flavor in it, maybe a salad with a really great zesty lemony dressing, and it was just so yummy and delicious, right? Sometimes we just want, sometimes a pleasurable food is a donut, and sometimes a pleasurable food is such a meal that's texturally complex and flavor-wise complex. And when we could optimize a meal for fullness factors and for pleasure, we end up better off at the end. Um, um, Time after eating is another piece. So these hormonal mechanisms of feeling full, they're not instantaneous. It's not like I eat a piece of chicken and now I'm full. It takes 10, 15, 20 minutes for those receptors in your brain that we've been speaking of to fill with the hormonal signals. Okay. And if as those signals are filling up, as those receptors are filling with your hormones of fullness, then you start feeling full. So what sometimes people might do is after a meal, they've had, let's say, one plate of food, sometimes they'll take a moment of, okay, let me give myself the grace or the favor of 10 minutes of, let me see how my body is doing. Sometimes they'll just sit at the table and chat with their family. Maybe they'll get up and wash some dishes in between or leave the room for a moment. It's not like, let me trick my body into forgetting that I'm hungry, but rather, let me give my body a favor and see how my body feels in 10 minutes once these hormonal signals have, reached their peak activity, or the levels are the right height in the blood and they're binding the receptors. I'm sure we've all had this experience, like you come home from work starving, you really quickly eat a plate of food, and you're done that plate of food in like 3 minutes and you're still feeling hungry. So you take a second plate of food, and then suddenly sometimes we'll feel like double full or like a little bit overly full. So what has happened there is that none of your fullness signals reached your brain before you eat the second plate. And then suddenly all those signals are rushing to your brain and you feel full from plate one and like doubly full or extra full from plate two. And sometimes giving yourself that grace or that favor of waiting a few minutes could help you decide, am I still hungry, or what am I still hungry for? Maybe I'm still a little bit hungry, so I want to take a small second piece of chicken and a little spoon of the salad, or maybe I just want a bite of chicken and I'm good, or maybe I don't need anything, or maybe I just want a little bit more water. Sometimes it's more of a favor that you do for your body by waiting a few moments to see what you're hungry for. Okay, let's see. What and how much should you be eating? Okay, so this myplate.gov graphic is from USDA, and in the olden days, there was that like black pyramid, if you remember, with like those like yellow. Mr. Rose Miller, or is nodding. He's my guy with the video on. Yes, you remember it. So the bottom had grains, and then there was like the fruit and vegetables. I remember from kindergarten, so I'm now you know how old I am. And then was like the protein, and like I don't remember, beans maybe were up there, and like the top is fat, and there are all these like yellow diamonds floating around. I don't know what they meant. But then came the pyramid that had like those slices out of it. That one only lasted for a few years. That was when I was in high school. And now we have the My Plate graphic. And I want to tell you that this is not gospel. I don't perfectly agree with it. There's my little suggestions of what I would add to it. It's somewhat helpful. Okay, so what I think the plate method should be, not quite exactly the myplate.gov graphic, but what we're looking for is half our plate should be vegetables, whether that's cooked or raw. Now, they don't always have to be on your plate. Vegetables in a bowl counts, like a soup, right? About a quarter of the plate should be a carb, a high fiber carb, ideally, and about a quarter of the plate protein in most cases. Your fruit could be instead of your carb. Some people prefer that. I think dairy could be a subcategory of protein. So maybe like a meal would be yogurt as your protein. But that's just like a helpful way to think of meal planning. We're moving towards all of our carbs being high in fiber. I think that fiber is that nutrient, or there is data to show this, that most Americans get not nearly enough fiber. Most adults need between 25 to 30 grams of fiber in a day. There's interesting research that for people with diabetes, getting 50 grams of fiber can actually lower blood sugars. Most of us in America, I think, are getting closer to 10 grams of fiber. So this is something piece that's very actionable. Some of the high fiber carbs are things like whole grains, beans, lentils, chickpeas, peas, whole grain pasta, whole wheat bread, quinoa, barley, farro, buckwheat, bulgur. Sometimes these are foods that we don't always think of when we're thinking of going grocery shopping or planning a meal. But when we, in a way, open our mind to some of the new options, we can add more to what we're able to eat. We can add more foods that are enjoyable and more types of textures and more types of food to make eating more interesting and exciting while we're trying to eat healthier. So we talked about vegetables. We want it to be often about half of our meal, ideally twice a day. More is better than whatever. If your baseline amount of vegetables is a little bit every other day, any amount more than that is good. Perfection today or tomorrow isn't always necessary. Don't skip protein. So I think that protein is really crucial for giving us satiety or that sense of fullness. Now, if somebody has kidney disease, that does not mean they should not be eating protein. Um, Discuss with your nephrologist, but in most cases, and most nephrologists will tell you, um, you want to have a portion of protein with every meal, even if that could hasten somebody to need dialysis by a few months. It prevents malnutrition often. And when somebody comes, God forbid, into needing dialysis, if they're malnourished, their likelihood of doing well is super low. If they started dialysis a few months earlier because they were eating more protein, they're coming into dialysis not malnourished, and they're more likely to be more healthy for many more years or much longer than if they go into it malnourished. Now, regarding fat for satiety, so fat is important for satiety and heart health. Fat is crucial. It is important. It is something you should be eating. So the fats that are really good for promoting heart health are things like the fats that are in fish, the fats that are in nuts and seeds, avocado, olive. The fats that are not as good for heart health or that are uh, not healthy for our heart are saturated fats, like the fat that is in red meat, um, fats that are solid at room temperature, like margarine, coconut oil. Um, Many of us would do really good with eating fish over beef. Ideally, I like to say, it's going to sound a bit extreme. Ideally, we do better with beef less than once a week. Fish, often we do well with eating 4 times a week. And then there's some non-animal sources of protein that many of us don't think of or consider. Beans, which aren't carb, but also have protein. Tofu is a great one, tempeh, plenty others. And then when planning a meal, especially a holiday meal or a Shabbos meal, many people feel more that sense of variety when they have a few vegetable options and just one carb option. So they can look at the table and look at the meal and feel like, oh, there's a few things here that I can eat. And that gives you a sense of plenty rather than a sense of restriction with eating. Okay, we're going to touch a bit about exercise. So Ellie said any movement is good. Yes, 100%. I'm going to divide exercise into 2 categories: cardio and strength training. Cardio, also known as aerobic, gives you the metabolic benefits, which means the benefits for blood sugar, for example, and your strength training gives you overall, general, on balance, more benefits for bone health, balance, that category. They're both crucial. It's important to make sure you're getting some cardio, not just strength training, if you're aiming to get better blood sugar outcomes from the exercise that you're doing. Another way to describe cardio is out of breath exercise. You want to be doing something that gets you a bit out of breath. You can discuss with your own PCP or cardiologist if you have any heart issues that might limit that, what's safe for you to do. Okay, here are some practical ideas. So don't do this alone. Enlist your family, enlist your friends. Ask your healthcare provider, are there any referrals? Are there any other healthcare providers who can be helpful for me? A diabetes educator, a dietitian. For some people who haven't exercised in a long time and have some joint pain, maybe a referral to PT for physical therapy is a great way to get started into exercise. A lot of my patients will do that. You can do aqua PT. Maybe you need, if you're having a lot of stress and that's affecting how you're eating, some people need a referral for therapy, but get those Ask your doctor what sort of supports you could need. Ask your PCP what sort of supports could help you. And then ask your family or enlist your family. If the person doing the grocery shopping is not yourself, discuss with your family members, I'm trying to do this. Like, can you help me? What can we do together? It's really important to not do it alone. Now, managing diabetes isn't about don't do this, don't eat this, don't eat this. We need to also optimize food for enjoying it in ways that maybe we haven't. We want to increase the potential of enjoyment from food. So if you're not a dairy eater, let's say you haven't eaten anything with beans in 6 months, and that's a great food for you, sometimes it's helpful to experiment with new foods, new recipes, new ways of eating things. Maybe try it first when you're eating out, get like a lentil soup or a bean quesadilla or a new grain. Try new spices, cuisines, get some good cookbooks. I will tell you some of my favorite cookbooks. There's one called One Pot Vegetarian. I'm gonna butcher the name. It's by Sabrina Fowler. She has a lot of really great whole grain recipes. And then most cookbooks by Yota Madolinghi are great. Some of my favorites are his cookbook called Plenty and Plenty More. A lot of really unique ways to have high fiber foods like grains and vegetables, often with like combinations you might not think of, or with spices you might not think of, new cuisine. Maybe you're used to eating what you've been eating for the past 50, 60 years. Maybe try, I don't know, some interesting Indian dish or some interesting a Mediterranean dish that can give you more potential for enjoyment. A lot of times, I think as the years go by, we get more set into our ways of I eat that, I don't eat that, or I won't eat that. And sometimes giving yourself a moment of like, okay, I know I say I don't eat beans, but can I see if I have some openness or some willingness to try a new food? And there's a lot of cognitive strategies we use with that in practice with my patients. It's helpful to have multiple options of foods that you're wanting yourself to be eating rather than just that one vegetable option and multiple, potato kugel and another kugel and more bread. Sometimes we have more carb options and fewer vegetable options. We feel very restricted. It's not a good feeling. Um, it's helpful to have your environment optimized. So that could have to do with making sure the foods you're wanting to eat are in your home and that the foods you're not wanting yourself to be eating are not in your home as much. The environment for enjoyment is really important. Sitting down to eat in a relaxed moment with people you like, turn on music, maybe use a nice dish if that makes your environment good, or go eat outside if that's pleasant for you. We can really optimize our enjoyment from food, not just with the food, but also with the environment. Now, with exercise, it's really a bit of work and effort sometimes to find what you like to do. Some people like to exercise with people versus some other people like to exercise alone. Some people like to exercise indoors or outdoors. Some want a structured environment with someone telling them what to do or unstructured. Some people want to be in person in a class and some people want to do a video. Both of those could be structured, but are you with people? Are you in your own living room? Some people like to play sports, use exercise machines, or do exercise videos. There's also great ways to involve active leisure activities. Are you taking your grandkids to the zoo? That's exercise. Are you going to the mall? Are you, I don't know, going boating or taking a hike? Some leisure activities that could be active are really great ways to bring activity in a very enjoyable way for yourself. And yes, that with that, I think we can wrap up and take questions that you may have.
Okay, just want to say thank you to Brendel. That was an amazing presentation. And of course, Adam and Ellie, so much great information here. I'm wondering a couple of things while people feel free, everybody, to put questions into the chat. And maybe while they're doing that, Brent, do you think you could put the cookbook that you recommended into the chat? And if any, Adam or Ellie, if you had any helpful resources or anything that you wanted to share, feel free to put that into the chat to everyone as well. Thank you. All right, any questions, anybody? I know it's a lot to process, but any questions for any of our panelists, any or all? You can go ahead and put it in there now. Let's see. Thank you. Thank you very much. I see that we're getting some of the links in there. That's wonderful. How does the glycemic index get into it? Who wants to take that one? That was a question that just got texted. Brendel, you're.
Did I take that it's a nutrition thing?
Please, of
Okay,
course.
let me just put the the book here. Okay. And then I'll put the other one in a moment.
All right,
So
thank
that's a really good question. So glycemic index, the way the studies were done to determine what a food's glycemic index is they had people eating a food, a certain measure of it, and then they measured their blood sugar response over time. Now, it's helpful to remember that there's a lot of variation between individuals. So in these studies, they might have had, I don't know, a few dozen people, maybe more. And then they're averaging the response. But it's helpful to remember that the variation was great in the studies. It's not like everyone, if the glycemic, if like the average response of blood sugar, making up a number, is 128, that everyone was between 115 and 135. No, it could have been a huge variation. So how your body responds to eating oatmeal might not look like how mine or Adam's or Ellie's or Audrey's looks like, right? There's a very big variation. Additionally, we are not eating just a single food. We're not eating just a slice of bread or just a cup of watermelon. I'm eating bread with tuna fish on it, and then I already ate like a cookie before, and then 20 minutes later, I'm gonna have like carrots and hummus. I don't know, right? So as other foods are in your stomach and digestion is slowed, that completely alters your glycemic response to that individual food. Some people find it very helpful. In my practice, it doesn't seem to be what I recommend my patients focusing their energies on.
Okay, thank you. Again, this one's open. Go ahead and see who would like to take it. How beneficial or harmful is intermittent fasting? Anybody have a take on
Did
that?
I speak
guess
to
that
the
this
I'll let
nutrition question?
I'll let Brendel do
Okay.
that one too.
So it's a really good question. I love this question. So every study that I've looked at on intermittent fasting is as follows, or a few types of a few ways that they do it. Maybe they assign one group to fast, to do intermittent fasting, and another group not to. But they don't assign them eat this exact amount of food, and the other group is also eating the exact same food. They either, and if they don't assign them food, they're usually not measuring what they ate. They're usually not doing like diet recalls and counting how many calories they ate. Okay. But when they are, here's the clincher. Those in the intermittent fasting group are always eating less than those in the regular diet group. So it introduces that question, is it the intermittent fasting that leads to the benefits in blood sugar or weight, or is it the fact that it's somewhat calorie restricted or lower in calories? There's no studies that randomized two groups to the exact same food. And they said, here is your package of food for Sunday, for Monday, for Tuesday. You must eat all this food for intermittent fasting group between noon and 8 p.m. for the other group, whenever you want. Like there are no studies that did that. So people who see benefits will see benefits probably because they're lower in calories. Is it dangerous? It's usually not dangerous, but my concern is that if it's not a method of eating that's sustainable for you, like any, not that this is the most extreme diet people could do, but in general, extreme diets are not sustainable. Usually people don't stay on them forever. And then it leads to what we call weight cycling. So you do this diet, you lose 20 pounds, you like get completely fed up with it and you stop and then you gain 22. So you end up at a slightly higher weight. So my main concern is that if I told somebody to do that, I'd be leading them to have a net 2 pounds of weight gain, not a net benefit over time. That's my concern with it.
I kind of just ask this real quick.
Please.
So I think that a lot of times intermittent fasting, like patients really at times need something to do something more extreme to lose weight, right? Like they need to make a change. It's not happening. You know, they say, it's been a year or two and I can't lose weight. So I find that intermittent fasting, like Brendan said, like it's more of an extreme approach. Now, if it's helping the patient, then I always encourage them. So what's the next steps when you're off this diet? Because I don't see it long standing. So I feel like it's a great way and like it could be a healthy way to help stimulate somebody and influence someone to make that change. but then like, what's the next step? So that's why I work on the next steps. It's like either um, working with a nutritionist, getting back, what's your plan with exercise and dieting so you don't regain those 20 pounds? Like, so I think like a lot of patients, they want to do something, by all means, do it. But then what's the next step after that? So that's kind of where I think we should pick up, in that diet.
Makes sense. Thank you, Adam. We have a few more questions. So here's a big one. GLP-1 drugs, how do they treat diabetes, and do they have additional benefits for weight reduction? Anyone want to take that? Brendel? Looks like you're
Okay.
ready to go. Okay.
I could speak about GLP-1s for like an entire hour and a half. Okay. So, GLP-1 drugs were first tested for the indication, the disease called diabetes. And now, so they've been on the market and used for diabetes for more than a decade, I think now. Now they are FDA approved for and used for the indication of the diagnosis of obesity. We consider obesity to be a disease. Okay, obesity is a chronic disease. Obesity is not like a willpower problem, a self-control problem, a character problem. It's a chronic disease. GLP-1s work on the hypothalamus and can turn down appetite, turn down the dial of appetite. People tend to eat 35% fewer calories on GLP-1s and lose between 15 to 20% of their weight, depending on which drug they're on, and also how optimizing they are with lifestyle and like nutrition and exercise. So in general, insurance will cover them for diabetes. Sometimes the person has to have tried a cheaper drug first, but overall, insurances will cover it for diabetes. Occasionally, insurances will cover them for the indication of obesity, much less frequently. They can prevent diabetes, they can help lose weight, but more importantly, they have really good data on lowering risks of like the bad stuff. Like number on a scale is not in and of itself the outcome that's the most meaningful, but someone's risk of dying of heart attack or having heart disease, those risks are decreased on GLP-1s. There's studies that look at them with for sleep apnea. There's benefits for heart disease. There's benefits for longevity, life, how long someone's living. There's benefits for risk of diabetes complications. There's benefits. So when we look at them through a medical lens, it's not like there's less care, shall I say, on the actual number on the scale versus is it going to help this person live a longer, healthier life? And many times the answer to that question is yes.
Thank
I
you,
just,
Adam or Ellie. You want to add? Sure.
oh, Ellie, were you gonna say something? Sorry. Um, I would just say that, like everything, I would second everything Brendel said. Uh, Clinically, there's not a whole lot of side effects with the medications, and they help patients overall control sugar, but also lose weight. If anything, you see gastroenterology symptoms, and it's really the process is titrating very slowly. I mean, you don't, this medication, you only will change the dose after a month, and you're only administering that dose weekly. So it's a really great medication, and people read horror stories online, but honestly, it's it's they're really safe. And another thing is like if sometimes uh, I'll ask a patient about endocrine or thyroid cancers in the family because there is some data about that being on these medications you have to be a little cautious about. But otherwise, like if somebody doesn't have any major chronic gastroenterology conditions, is a really great medication. I deal with more of like patients that aren't diabetic and they're trying to get these medications, and insurances really are just so challenging to get it covered. And that's kind of just, have to figure out the next steps from there. But I'm hopeful it's going to happen.
I
Yeah.
want to add about the GI side effects, which are very common, and most of my patients on GLP-1s will experience them. But when you work with someone who it has a lot of experience with GLP-1s, we'll be able to help you manage those side effects And I can think of maybe one or two of patients on my own who actually had to stop their GLP-1s due to side effects. Nausea is very common. We will help you manage nausea. Constipation is quite common. We will help you with that. When somebody's taking them, let's say through one of the online services, they're not really getting that personalized attention of asking about what their symptoms are and giving specific advice on how to manage them. And then oftentimes people have to stop these medicines that could potentially be helpful. So yeah, go ahead, Ellie, add to that, please.
No, you're doing great. Nothing to say. You guys got all the good points.
Very good, yeah.
Just one more quick pointer about this, like for those that are not diabetic. I mean, my colleagues, um, all throughout the primary cares that I work for, they err on the side of caution with compound medication. So like a lot of patients, they're like not seeing somebody, they're getting these mixture form of these medications. And you know, I feel like, yeah, if that's where I stay away from a little bit, just because we don't understand the mixture. My practitioners they don't give those. But like Brenda said, like if you're working with somebody, even the compound forms, the mixture forms, they can be very well controlled. You have to just really work with somebody, you know. So that's what I would say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
your PCP should be able to, like, I'm not speaking about yours, but a PCP should be managing obesity. It's not something that you need to go to like a specialty provider necessarily, but obesity is a primary care disease. Obesity is more common than type 2 diabetes, and type 2 diabetes 98% of the time will be managed by a primary care provider. So you shouldn't feel like you need to go to somebody. If your PCP isn't comfortable prescribing them, I wonder why, but your PCP could and should be prescribing them appropriately. And with the compounded medications, there have been studies that have taken samples of these compounded medications, which is the ones made in compounding pharmacies, not by the major drug makers, Novo Nordisk or Eli Lilly, which make the brand names we know of. So studies that have looked at these compounded mixtures have oftentimes found different concentrations than you think you're getting, either more or less. And in my practice, I sometimes anecdotally hear patients describing more severe side effects than I have my patients on the brand name drugs. This is just an anecdote. I don't know if there's any data to this, but if that trend is true, I would link it to the potential that maybe the concentration is not what they're thinking it is.
Thank you. One clear takeaway, I think, is that it's something for it's a long time being used for treating diabetes. And if anyone's considering it either for that and or for obesity, that a great place to start is with their primary care provider to start having that conversation and see what's available to them. All right, thank you. We have a few more questions. I'm going to start though with one that is a little bit all-encompassing for those of us who are on the call, who, as Ellie mentioned before, are used to the routine-busting holidays. So we have a big carbohydrate holiday coming up called Shavuot, and people are asking, "Help us! Is there any strategies to address the many breaks in routine, staying up late, eating late, the different types of foods that might be more tempting than usual?" Brenda,
Happy.
I
I don't want to take over all the Q&A,
No,
but I'm
Brendel,
happy to talk about that.
definitely a you question.
Okay, so yes, so there's this challenge in our world, the world in general, and I think even more in our world, where there are certain things that we think of. It's not that often that this happens or that happens. But when you add up all the, it's not off that often that it's Shavuos. It's not that often that it's Shabbos. It's not that often that on my kid patients, they have the siyum not that often, and their Rebbe or their teacher gives this prize that often, right? But like all these not that often add up. The answer isn't to not enjoy the holidays. I think that we can make very intentional decisions for ourselves about what the holiday is for and how we can optimize enjoying the holiday. Forget the spiritual aspects of the holiday, but the important physical and eating aspects, but optimize those in a way that's good for our bodies. So for some people, that might mean they're going to make a dessert, but they're not going to they're used to making like numerous desserts and having lots of leftover dessert that's sitting around all afternoon. Maybe they're going to choose to make one dessert item and they're going to serve it for dessert every meal. I'm just giving an example. Or maybe they're going to say, okay, we're going to make sure that we go for a 10, 15-minute walk after every holiday meal. We're going to make sure we get up and move our bodies. Or when I'm planning my menu, I don't need to take inspiration from whatever Jewish magazine that shows these lavish pictures of meals with 18 dishes. I'm going to make sure that my meal has good protein, multiple vegetable sides, a high fiber carb side. Maybe it's not what in my mind is traditionally a meal for Shavuot, but I'm going to make my own tradition for what it could be. Maybe it's not the exact same list of foods that you're maybe have always eaten, but it's a very intentional choice of shifting and deciding what is the right choices for you and your family. And when we do that, we can often sometimes remember what gives us pleasure on the holidays. I'm going to make sure I invite my neighbors, my friends, so that the meal is also pleasurable because of who I'm with. I'm going to have my grandkids over, or I'm going to eat out. We're going to do a potluck with my neighbor, whatever it is. There's ways to make the holiday very, very enjoyable when you plan and make an intentional choice about what you're going to be doing and what you're not going to be doing.
I just
Right.
mention one other
Yeah.
thing.
Please.
So, like, modification and intention, I think is most critical. Like, we're not saying stop foods, right? But like, um, if you even for Kiddush and Shabbos, like if you know there's going to be cholent at a Kiddush, and you're going to have cholent at home, pick one place to eat it. If you know there's cookies at Kiddush, cookies at home, like modify it. So like, I think the intention is the most important thing. And yeah, that's just walk
Yeah.
on Shabbos. You have to walk. Okay.
Yeah,
No, thank you. Yeah,
I'll
Ellie, please.
I'll echo to what Adam said. I think the fact that you're even asking this question is great because that means you're already starting to think about it. So when you're in this situation, you're not going to do anything impulsive or, rash. But I would also set yourself, don't it's a holiday. It's, anniversaries, birthdays, we're going to obviously want to enjoy. But give yourself a reasonable number, of treats that, look forward to. Be like, I'm going to have cheesecake today, right? Maybe that's just means one slice at one meal. Pick your meal, look forward to that, enjoy that you had it. But we probably shouldn't be having cheesecake at every meal. So I think setting a plan is key, as everyone's already said.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And I agree with you, Ellie, just the fact, number one, that somebody asked, but also that we're all talking about it here today. We've already just set a path towards intentionality, which is amazing. There's one practical question. Maybe we'll end with this. Somebody just wants to know, I think with Brendel, this is for you again. What about the use of, back to the diabetes, pre-diabetes, what about the use of almond flour, stevia, artificial sweeteners? Are those helpful in managing?
That's a really good question. Okay, so those are separate types of categories. So alternative flours. So almond flour usually is just ground almonds. It's a overall lower carb option. It's not going to create baked goods that taste like they're from wheat flour. I also don't want you to have this mindset of if I make it like this, then I could eat whatever I want or as much as I want. It's ideally we want to be in a place where we're not having super strong cravings and this drives to eat, and there's things we can work on to help with that. But the idea that if I make it with these dietitian approved subs, then all is I could do I'm free to do whatever I want and it won't be bad for my body. A cake is still a cake. Is it a lower carb, higher fat cake that will slow the rise in blood sugars? Yeah, but is it also going to check off in your brain, this was cake, or is it going to be like, meh, that wasn't even so good. I still need my cake. I know that wasn't a completely straight answer to your question, but I think that speaks to the important pieces. Now, the diet sugars, the sugar substitutes. So that is a really great topic. In the moment, they don't, like as you're eating them, they're not raising your blood sugars. There is some data that they can help, that they make insulin resistance worse, that they're overall not good for us metabolically. The research that has linked them or has at first seen a link to cancer in animal studies with super high doses hasn't panned out in human studies at normal human doses. So it's not something that I worry is going to cause cancer. It's something that I wonder if is not great for us metabolically. So let's say somebody is today, their usual is they're finishing a 2-liter bottle of soda every 2-3 days. Is a diet soda a better option? Yes. Is less soda a better option? Yes. So they're not the solution to blood sugars. They could sometimes be a helpful piece, but overall quality of diet is way more important than if you're putting stevia or Splenda in your coffee. Your 2 teaspoons of sugar versus 2 teaspoons of Splenda is not why somebody's blood sugar is high. If you like 2 teaspoons of sugar is overall not that much. It's 8 grams of carbs. It's not the make it or break it in your diabetes care. And Splenda is not going to save you from diabetes complications.
Thank you. Ellie, Adam, anything to add to that on either sweeteners or almond flour, alternative flours?
I just focus on natural. I do. That's what I do. I think it's good.
Unnatural. Yeah. Okay. Wow. I want to kind of leave off where I started with deep appreciation for our 3 panelist speakers today, taking time out of their Sunday for this important topic. I also want to, there's been a few questions. I want to let everybody know that there is going to be a recording, a little bit of the beginning cut off, but all the content is captured. So I will wait for that to download, and you can expect, if you register for this program, you'll get it in an email within a day or 2. And I'll also send out a general email. I'll share the link with the panelists so they can share it. So everybody who wants a link to the program should be able to get one. I want to also just highlight our next Zoom program. It's going to have a different spin. It's about your health, but coming at it from a different perspective. So on June 7th, Sunday morning, June 7th, also at 10 a.m. on Zoom, we will be partnering with an organization that we've partnered with before called Ematai, and bringing you a program on prayer and health, the values and perhaps challenges associated with Jewish prayer and sickness and recovery. So a very interesting topic, something I hope that I'll see many of you there as well. And I look forward to also hearing your feedback about today's program and suggestions for future programs. We're definitely committed to bringing, along with the basic services that Beaker Holm of Greater Washington provides to help you when you're sick or caregiving for someone who's sick, we also want to provide whatever we can to help keep our community members healthy. So send along any feedback and or suggestions you have for future programs. Thank you, Ellie, Adam, and Brendel, and thank each and every one of you for attending and help us set the rest of our Spira, rest of counting Omer toward Shavuot, to be intentional as we think about all of the important information that was shared here today. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Audrey.
Have a great day.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.